Hughes from Blinkist. Welcome.
Cool. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me even at the back? Excellent. Okay, so yeah, my name is Ben Hughes, and I'm here to talk about what it's like to build and lead a team when you, as the team lead, are the remote. And full disclosure, when I first made this slide deck, I had about 20 GIFs in there. Then a designer colleague of mine told me that, Ben, did you know that actually it's possible to have too many GIFs in a presentation? And I was like, get the fuck out of here. But anyway, I managed to trim it down to now a much more reasonable 3, so please enjoy. And also, I have to say, if my trousers fall down in the middle of the presentation, do not be alarmed. It's only because I forgot my belt at home because I flew in sweatpants. So it's not like a weird political statement or anything. Cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the benefits and challenges and some solutions I've come across in this situation where I'm leading a team remotely. So first, I want to rewind a little bit. Here's one of the 3 GIFs. So back in 2010, I was working as a management consultant for a big American company, and I was doing these crazy hours. The work wasn't that rewarding, mostly number crunching, and I really wasn't happy. Luckily, a few years prior, I was on a study abroad thing in Australia, and I met this German guy called Sebastian Klein, and we bought a car together, and we were like road tripping around, getting to know each other, getting to know the sites. And unfortunately, that ended about as badly as a joint car ownership venture can end. So we were driving in the middle of nowhere in Queensland. It was pitch black, and all of a sudden, this kangaroo jumps out right into the middle of the road. And I remember the last thing I thought was, that kind of looks like the Qantas logo, like the kangaroo suspended in midair like that. And next thing I know, it's coming through the windshield, it smacked me right in the face, we're off the road, I'm braking as hard as I can, and we finally hit a tree and come to a stop. And I don't know, is anyone here from Australia? Okay, cool. So this is like totally mundane for all of you. It's like part of your driver's license test or something. But for us, it was pretty shocking. Luckily, everyone was fine. And actually, Sebastian and I stayed good friends, and he also wound up as a management consultant, and he also didn't like it. So we said, hey, let's quit our jobs and start something together. And that's exactly what we did, and literally in that order. So we both quit. Then I flew over to Berlin to see him, and we were sitting down in his flat going like, now what? And this is an approach I would not recommend to anyone else because it puts a lot of pressure on you to succeed. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we tried as background to my current remote situation. So first, this was like the heat of summer. We were trying to come up with an idea, and we were sitting in this sweltering flat, and we just felt like, okay, people must be willing to pay to alleviate this discomfort. But the options you had, like getting a fan or air conditioning, they didn't really appeal to us because a fan, it makes a lot of noise and you can get a sore throat if it's too strong, the airflow. And air conditioning isn't really like the environmentally friendly option. So I looked into it and I found out that the US military actually has these special scarves that they use when they operate in hot environments. And inside they have these hyper-absorbent crystals that you barely notice when it's dry, but if you put it in water, they absorb like a ton of water and it becomes this plump sausage that you can wrap around your neck. And then the water evaporates and it cools you down. And because it's around your neck, the coolness gets transported all over your body. So we were like, perfect, let's do a consumer version of this. So we set up a web shop, found a factory in China to produce these for us, and designed the logo, and we called it the Penguin Hug. In retrospect, maybe we could have spent a little bit more time on the naming process. But regardless, I fully expected that everyone and their aunt would want one, and we would be millionaires in like a couple of months. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work that way because it turns out it's really hard to sell a product where you first have to spend like 5 minutes talking about what it is and how it works, and only then can you start selling. So that didn't really work out. So next we tried making our own like self-improvement blog / website. We called it the Handbook of Awesome. Again, maybe could have ideated past the first name that came to our minds, but yeah, it is what it is. And I still think we had some really, really good stuff there around like productivity, health, and happiness, like life hacks basically. But to be honest, we were a bit late in the game. Like the self-improvement blogosphere was pretty saturated already with the likes of Tim Ferriss, etc. And so that didn't really take off either. Although, again, I fully expected that this would become viral in like a couple of months and everyone would be reading it. But yeah, it didn't happen. So at this point, I was running out of money and I had to go back to work again as a consultant. And surprise, surprise, I still didn't like it. Luckily for me, a couple months later, Sebastian calls me up and says, hey, guess what? Me and 3 other guys, we've just started a company and we just got a bit of funding for it. Would you like to come on board and do English content for us? And I said, okay, sure, sounds good, but I really don't want to move to Berlin. I want to stay in Helsinki, Finland, where I was living. And can I do it remotely? And they were like, yeah, okay, sure. And probably the reason for their hesitance was that this was back in 2012 and remote employees weren't maybe as common as they are today. But as it happens, it's working really well. And in many ways, it's maybe granted me the kind of location independence that was one of the driving forces for why we wanted to start something ourselves in the first place. And yeah, the company's idea was and remains the same. The idea is to offer the key insights from thousands of best-selling nonfiction books transformed into powerful packs you can read or listen to in 15 minutes or less. And it's called Blinkist. Now, a lot has changed over the past 7 years. So it's now has 12 million users, 150 employees. And it's gone from this startup mode of everybody doing everything to us having very clear like values and processes and structures. So basically we've gotten a bit more corporate, but still have that kind of startup vibe. And one thing has remained the same though, which is that my team, which has now grown to 16 people, they're all sitting in Berlin at one long desk in the office, and I'm remote in Helsinki, Finland. And I think this isn't that common an arrangement, like remote employees, sure, even teams that are fully remote, but I do think it's still a bit unusual for the team lead to sit away from the team who are all in one location. So I would now like to talk a little bit about that, the benefits that arrangement brings, the challenges, and maybe some tips for how to surmount those challenges that I found. By no means a comprehensive list, but just stuff I've discovered. So yeah, let me start off with the benefits. And I should mention that I also ran a little survey in our team asking people about their experiences with this arrangement. So you'll see some quotes here among the slides about what they said, how it works for them, what doesn't work, so forth. So first off, the first benefit is definitely that when the lead is not in the office, it really empowers team members to own their roles and be autonomous in them. So when I'm not around to answer every single question, team members basically, they tend to figure it out for themselves. And this results in learning and growth and professional development, so it's great for them. And here's a quote from a team member about that. It increases my ownership, enthusiasm, and confidence as I feel I have to represent certain topics or answer some spontaneous questions in the office that perhaps I would otherwise defer to the lead if she or he were in the building. Another benefit in being a remote lead is that it can actually be really useful sometimes to be detached from like the office environment, all the chaos and drama that goes on there sometimes. So for example, my team members told me that they really appreciate that when there are stormy times in the office, I seem calm when they reach out to me. And I can assure you that this is a pure illusion. I'm not a calm person at all. I panic when a cop car rolls by and I haven't even done anything. that they know of. But what I think it is that when all hell is loose in the office, I'm in my own remote bubble, like and so I appear calm to team members, and this in turn helps them to be calm as well. So that's really great. And also being a little bit detached from the office really helps me to be 100% about the business. So there's no personal stuff, no emotions, nothing like that. It's just, what do we need to do right now? And that can also be very useful. Here's a quote from a team member about that. I think a remote lead is often a bit more relaxed and detached from the office drama and tensions. That helps them react a bit less emotionally, which then helps me to also get a more balanced view on the issues at hand. A third benefit I want to mention is that it's a little bit paradoxical, but when you're a remote, you really value the time you do actually then get to spend with your colleagues in the office. So whenever I go to Berlin, it feels almost like a little vacation. Like, I'm so happy to see everyone. I hug all my team members, if they're up for it, whenever I see them, because I really am that happy to see them. So that's really great. A fourth benefit, which doesn't just apply to leads, of course, but to all remotes, is that without the distractions of an office environment, you just get so much work done. It's crazy. Like, you can plow through a mountain of tasks and leave only crumbs behind. It's so efficient. And of course, if you need to think about something more complex, you can just stretch out on the sofa, grab a pen and paper and sketch out some ideas, and nobody's going to disturb you. So it's definitely very effective work. Another benefit that applies to all remotes, second GIF, is that there's no commute. And I can't emphasize, I mean, you all know this, but it's awesome. Like, it saves so much time, and when you put that time into taking better care of yourself, you get more energy, and you can feed that back into your work, so the employer also benefits. It's a win-win. And I couldn't find it for this presentation, but I remember reading about this big meta-analysis that some researchers did about factors that impact job satisfaction. And they looked at everything from like compensation to managers to co-workers to what kind of work you're doing. And one factor stood out above all others, and it was the length of your commute. Shorter is better. And you can't beat remote work for that, right? Like, my commute is 5 steps. It's awesome. But last but not least, maybe the biggest benefit of leading a team remotely is that I get to speak about it here in Cancun. Yeah, big shout out to Johnny. Thank you for the invite. Much appreciated. And oh yeah, by the way, also from here, I can still work and lead the team, so it's great. But yeah, it's not all smooth sailing always. Like, sometimes face-to-face really does have its benefits over being remote. So I'll talk a little bit about the challenges also. One challenge is definitely that as a remote, de facto, a lot of your communications will be in writing. And I love writing. Many times I prefer it to face-to-face because I get the chance to really think about what I want to say. But it does have its limitations. So you might have heard this saying that only 7% of communication is in the words we say, and the rest is in like gestures and inflections and tones of voice. And there's some truth to that. And I think the reason we have all that other stuff going on is that they help ensure that when we have good intentions, the recipient understands those good intentions. And in writing, without that, it's so easy to miscommunicate, say something that's taken the wrong way, and then that causes friction and conflict. And psychologist Daniel Goleman actually did some research around this, and he found that when you send an email to someone, the recipient always perceives your tone to be one notch more hostile than you intended. So if you send a positive email, they'll perceive it as neutral. And if you send a neutral email, they'll perceive it as hostile. So obviously there's a danger of things spiraling out of control there. Here we go, a quote from a team member. Communication can sometimes be more risky, especially with regards to unspoken communication like body language or aspects of communication not necessarily related to business, like joking around. I'd be very curious to know what off-color joke of mine prompted this response. But yeah, another challenge is that as a lead, you need to build strong relationships with your team, and that takes trust. And trust is typically built by spending time together, ideally in the same room. And obviously, as a remote, that's very tricky. And when we get to the solutions section, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that can still be done, but it's definitely a challenge. A third challenge is that when I'm far away, I just have less visibility into my team's day-to-day work. And this means that I maybe don't understand the challenges that they're facing as well as if I was present. So for example, say someone has been working really late nights for many days in a row. If I was present, I might pick up on that. I might say like, hey, what's going on? What can we do about this? Isn't sustainable? But as a remote, it might take me longer to spot that and do something about it. Another big challenge related to this is that as a team lead, it's your responsibility to help your team members grow and develop professionally. But that takes feedback. And when you're not in the office, you have much fewer kind of windows of opportunity to observe people as they work and then to draw feedback from those situations. So that's definitely tricky. And the last challenge I want to mention are meetings. So if you've ever participated in a conference call, you know that if the meeting is even a bit chaotic, people are kind of throwing ideas around, it's very dynamic conversation, not that well facilitated, it can be pretty tricky to jump in as a remote. Typically, you're probably going to interrupt someone, or someone's going to interrupt you because there's a lag, and this can discourage you from contributing. And also, you know, as a lead, you need to inspire and energize people, and this can be difficult to do in meetings as a remote, much easier in person. And of course, there's the thing that as a remote, you really sometimes struggle to get a read for the room. Like, if you're present, you can just kind of sense if there's tension or if everyone's relaxed. But as a remote, it can take a little bit longer to catch on. So those were like the main challenges that were identified. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about like tips for how to overcome those. The first is that you really have to trust people. So as a remote lead, there's no way you can oversee everything that's happening, so don't even try, because all that will do is discourage people from really owning their roles. So for example, I know full well that I couldn't lead just any team remotely. It's only the very like self-empowered, proactive, brilliant content team at Blinkist who enable me to fulfill this role remotely. And my job is more to like coach them, set strategies, budgets, and help them succeed. And of course, not everyone can or wants to fully own their roles. Like, people have different working styles. Some people like to be told what to do. But if you're a remote lead, you really need to find the people who are willing to embrace this kind of self-ownership and distributed authority. And of course, a prerequisite for that is that the company itself can't really be organized as like a old school hierarchy, because that really necessitates then old school management, which you can't really do as a remote. Ideally, I think it should be self-organized like Blinkist is, or at least have some organizational operating system that really embraces distributed authority and people owning their roles fully. And really the most critical part in finding people you can trust and who can own their roles is, of course, the hiring stage. And so what I would recommend there is that you first work with people as freelancers. So that's what we did. We had a bunch of freelancers creating content for us, and you pretty quickly get a feel for who's delivering, who's reliable, what everyone's working style is, who do you connect with. And then when it comes time to hire that first full-time employee, you know where to look. So you can pick the freelancer who you think is the best fit. And then after a while, when you have a couple of like trusted people on the ground, only then might it come time to hire like more seasoned subject matter experts, where You don't necessarily know how they work, you just see their CV. And yeah, when you're hiring the freelancers in the beginning, I mean, making them full-time positions, I think personally that it's not so important that they have all the skills they need. What's more important is that you know they have the right character and trust that they will learn and develop the skills that they need. A second solution is clarity, and what I mean by this is that in order for people to fully own their own roles and pursue decisions in their own domains, you have to be absolutely clear about what each role entails, what the goals are, what your expectations are for it. Otherwise, there's going to be chaos. So what we do is we make everything explicit. The accountability for every role is written down and it's visible to everyone. And there are no implicit assumptions about what people should be doing. If there are, they should be written down too. So this way, it's super clear to everyone who's doing what, where the different roles are kind of limited, where they intersect, where they don't intersect, and so forth. And another aspect of clarity as a remote lead is that you need to be super clear about when people can expect you to be responsive and when you expect others to be responsive. So for example, I make it totally clear to my team that I don't expect anyone to be responsive in the evenings or over the weekends, because guess what? I'm not going to be responsive in the evenings or over the weekends. Oh, hey, is anyone else here like a huge Arrested Development fan from where this came? Awesome. We should hang out later. Cool. Then a third solution I want to mention is, yeah, as I mentioned, the email, it can be a risky medium, and Slack messages and everything. And the reason I have this image here is that I've heard that this is the most passive-aggressive that an email can get. Like, this is the equivalent of punching someone in the face in the same room. And yeah, again, different mediums, different subtexts. But yeah, really, because the recipient will always perceive your email as one notch more hostile than you intended, it's so important to really carefully think about every message you send, because it's so easy for it to be misunderstood somehow. And actually, I have a good exercise for this that I like to do, that I highly recommend, which is that, especially if I get like a message or something happens that triggers me a bit, like I can feel I'm worked up, the first thing I do is that I try writing out the nicest, friendliest response I can possibly imagine. Like, I don't have to send it, it's just an exercise, but often when I reread that, I feel like, hey, this is actually pretty good, and I do wind up sending it. So that's just a way of avoiding kind of reacting emotionally when you know that things can spiral out of control. The fourth solution I want to talk about is making time for your team and knowing when you actually have to be physically present. So Google did some research around leadership, and they found that the most important characteristic of good leaders is that they make time for their team. And obviously, as a remote, this is tricky, but what I do is that, first of all, I have, of course, regular one-on-ones with team members, and I make a point of especially having them when it seems like there's nothing to talk about. Because when you make time and space, issues do tend to come up. Another thing I do is that whenever I am in Berlin, we like to have lunch together with the team, so there's also like space for more informal chit-chat. That's also important. And then I try to be really available on Slack all the time, even though it's terrible for my productivity. But I just figure my team members can't come up to me and tap me on the shoulder as if I was in the office. So it's important to have some like immediate medium that they can reach me with. And yeah, then the second part of this is that you need to know when it's time to jump on a plane and fly over. So this is especially true when there's like an emotional situation happening. As an example, we had a case where someone from the company applied for a role in our team and they didn't get it, and they were so disappointed and so upset, and I was trying to manage the situation from afar and it wasn't really working, and yeah, it didn't go well. So from then on, I swore like, okay, if ever there's a similar incendiary situation going on, I'm just gonna fly over. There it really is important to be present in the room. Oh yeah, a team member also commented on this. More flying in when a remote lead sees there are big conflicts and fires to put out. The fifth solution I want to mention is mindfulness. So I have a personal mindfulness practice, and I think it really helps me to avoid those knee-jerk reaction emails and messages and whatnot that sometimes can come easily if you get like an email or message that triggers you somehow, you get worked up about it. And through mindfulness, I think I've built a bit of a muscle there, like a mental muscle that enables me to step back and think like, okay, why am I getting so worked up about this? And it's really useful. And another area where it really helps is with meetings. So basically, all our content team meetings, we start with what we call 3 mindful breaths. So there, participants close their eyes and focus on where they feel the breath in their body, and also focus on what's important right now, the meeting. And we found that this really helps people arrive and forget about what they were doing 5 minutes ago, and it actually speeds up the meeting. And what's more, it makes it way more manageable for a remote because it's not as chaotic then, it's more structured. And here's the kind of set agenda for our weekly tactical meeting we have every week. Also, hey, I have to plug this great app that I'm using. It's called the Waking Up app for mindfulness. It's amazing. I had a mindfulness practice before it, but I think this has really elevated it to the next level for me. It's by a neuroscientist called Sam Harris. And I highly recommend it. Like, even if you think you already know everything about mindfulness, I highly recommend checking it out. It's excellent. And last but not least, as a remote, you can sometimes feel like all alone, but it's important to remember that it's not all up to you. So talk to other remotes. Often you'll find that the challenges you face are similar to the challenges they face. You can share best practices, tips, so forth. And in fact, here is a Slack message from someone on our people team who precisely approached all the remotes to ask for best practices so they could put together like a toolkit for remotes. And that's super valuable, of course. And then I would also add that, of course, the structures and attitudes and processes that a company has in place for remotes, they really have a powerful impact on the remote experience. So it's important to advocate for your needs there, and when you do that together with other remotes, you can be more powerful. But also it means that if you're a remote in a small company where there aren't many other remotes, you have a big responsibility because you need to deliver outstanding work and also keep an eye out for improvement opportunities so that you can smooth the way for future remotes who will be joining. So then, that was it for the solutions. I'm going to give a quick recap about what we talked about. So first, it's hardly rocket science, but I'd say there are pros and cons to leading a team remotely for the team members as well as for the lead. We talked about the fact that having a remote lead encourages people to take ownership of their own roles. It helps the lead be maybe calm in stormy times. It means you really value the time you do get to spend in office more. There's obviously the productivity boost and the fact that you don't have a commute, which is awesome, and the Nomad Summit. And then as for challenges, I mentioned that writing is a risky medium. Something is lost there versus face-to-face communication. There's a lack of visibility into people's day-to-day work. It can be tricky to build relationships and trust with people. And meetings, if they're chaotic, can be a bit challenging as a remote. As for solutions, I mentioned building trust and trusting people, being totally clear about your expectations and the goals and roles that people have, being very mindful about your communications, thinking very carefully before you send anything out, making time for people in order to build those relationships, adopting maybe some kind of mindfulness practice or routine in the team meetings, and talking to other remotes in the remote community. That's it for me. Maybe I would just say that I would love to connect with anyone here who's interested, so please feel free to come and grab me later or connect on LinkedIn. And also I want to mention that Blinkist is remote friendly and we're often hiring. So if you're at all interested in job opportunities or the self-organized way of working that we have, check out www.blinkist.com/jobs. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that me and Sebastian, the guy who we co-owned the car with, where the kangaroo jumped in through the windshield, we've recently written a book. It's called The Loop Approach, and it's about how to transform companies into like an agile, self-organized way of working. It's out by a German publisher called Campus, and Chicago University Press is republishing it in the US in 2020. So if you're at all interested in like the topic of the future of organizations, consider checking it out. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. You mentioned the challenges of keeping up with the day-to-day tasks of your employees and also the importance of like facilitating their learning. Do you have any specific processes or maybe like questions you make sure to ask them or something to like make sure you do a good job of making this happen?
Yeah, good question. So basically what I found works well for me is that I like to ask each team member if there's like a specific area in which they want to develop in, and then that maybe narrows like my focus a bit, so I don't have to keep an eye out for everything, but I try to keep an eye out for the things I know they want to develop in. And also then if we've discussed something, I might say like, okay, normally I wouldn't see what you're doing with, say, the editorial calendar. But if someone says, hey, I actually want to develop my skills in this regard, I'll say like, great, then, when you encounter a challenge, reach out to me and let's discuss it then. So it's still not like really observing, it's a little bit more proactive, but this kind of focus has maybe helped me, or let's say it's the latest thing I'm trying, but I'm still figuring it out.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I also work as part of a remote team, and I found that everything kind of reflected my own experience.
Cool.
I was curious because at the moment, from what I understand, you're in Helsinki and the rest of your team is mostly in Berlin. How would you feel if some of your team in Berlin suddenly asked to become nomads, for instance, and also travel and work remotely? How do you think that would change the way your team operates or not?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
If your team decided to also go remote, how do you think, would you be open to that? And how do you think it would change the way you work as a team, the way you lead them, or not change anything?
Good question. So I would definitely be open to that. I mean, I've proven that it can work, so that would totally work. I mean, I think it might get a bit more challenging if someone is like many time zones over, just scheduling meetings and such, but I'm sure we could find a workaround for that. And I don't think it would change that much, to be honest. Yeah, we might need to shift some meetings around, but because people really own their roles and because they're used to dealing with me as a remote, I think we could pretty much keep up the same processes and everything would keep running pretty smoothly.
So touching on the freelance to employee transition there, do you have any kind of canned questions or like interview questions for that freelancer to transition him into employee? And then a secondary question, do you intentionally go and meet them or do you do it all virtually?
Sorry, the second question was?
Do you do it like go and meet them physically in person and do that interview to make that transition, or do you still handle that virtually?
So back then, all of our freelancers were based in Berlin, so they would come into the office and we would talk to them. We didn't really have we had like an interview guide, but at least the way I remember it now, that didn't play as big a part as test tasks. So we tried to like simulate the actual role, and So a typical transition for us would be that somebody was producing content freelance, and now we're hiring them to manage other freelancers and kind of edit them and stuff. And the good thing there is that we can still keep them on as a freelancer, but just change their job description, right? And then after a couple of months of that, we can say like, okay, you're still thriving in this new role. So I think, yeah, interview questions totally make sense to ensure that the person is really motivated and wants to come on board for the right reasons. But as for assessing like their skills, I think there's no substitute for really getting them to do their job.
So you just said you have 150 employees. What's the percentage who are like remote and who are in the office?
Oh, good question. So we just hired a bunch more remotes. I would say maybe at the moment 10% are remotes and the rest are in the office. But I would say that being remote aware is very much on our radar. Like you saw the Slack message from the people team who really want to improve the remote experience. So I could really see that proportion going up over the coming years.
Hi, I would like to ask you, what would you say to other team leaders to convince them that hiring remotes is a good idea? We saw the benefits for the remotes, but what are the benefits for the team leaders or the bosses?
Good question. I mean, one thing is that it expands the talent pool, right? Because not everyone is willing to relocate. Sometimes if, say, somebody's, I mean, it also increases their job satisfaction, right? Because they can work from wherever and whenever. What other benefits would I give there? I mean, maybe one of the big things is that there's not that much to lose, I think. Like, it works really well with the technological tools we have now. So, yeah, it's a bit of an artificial limitation, I think, to just say, like, no, we're only hiring from here. I mean, of course, there are some roles where you need people to be physically present, but not for all of them. And I think, yeah, that's also what's driving this kind of boom in remote work right now.